The larger medical community in general, I find that kind of looks down on birthing at home.
It's a fear-based system in a lot of ways. And when you're a nurse, when you're a doctor, when you're part of the system, the way that you're trained is to intervene when things go wrong.
Think it's a lot not knowing that you can trust your own intuition and you can make these decisions based on what your body is telling you. Welcome to another episode of the Holistic Sister Circle. Today we have such an incredible panel and topic, natural birth versus medicalized birth. And for those of you all who've been tuning in every single week, let us know in the chat too, how have you been liking these debates so far, these topics so far, and are they giving you the energy and the transformation that you may need in your own life at this time? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mute all of our speakers at this moment. And the way that this works is I'm just going to ask a question. From that question, I would love for you to share with us your take on it. And then we'll just read the room from there. If there is something that you don't agree with that someone is saying, totally fine. I highly recommend that you chime in and you share what that is. I just ask that we do not overtalk each other and we do give the courtesy of giving each other the room. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get this started. So Abby, we're going to start with you for our first question. And I actually would love all of your takes on this one as well. But the first question for Abby is, what does natural birth mean to you? And what does it not mean to you?
So, natural birth means to me really just to allow the body the natural physiological process that we were meant to have. What it doesn't mean to me is that there's any sort of fault if it can't go that way as well. And to me, this natural birth process is something that I personally strived for. And we can get into maybe later on why that wasn't possible for me. But I am a very, very holistic minded person. And so I love really tuning into nature, really tuning into the body, and really asking, like, how is this process kind of divinely and innately meant for us? And I think that there is so much wisdom that we just can't even grasp in these natural processes that we don't even know all the ins and outs of yet in our medical system. And so I love, on one side, allowing that as much as possible. And then the other side is knowing that we don't have to cling so tightly to that to feel that if we can't go that route 100%, that there's some sort of failure in our body, that there's some sort of failure in who we are as women and just who we are showing up as in that moment. And I would love to just deepen this conversation, but I'll leave it there.
Awesome. Thank you, Abby. Elizabeth, I would love for you to share next. And if you have a personal testimony or story to share as well, that would be super helpful. Oh, you're muted. Let me unmute you. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, great. Thanks for having me here. So one of the things I do is I'm a certified perinatal chiropractor. So I'm talking about this all day, every day in my practice. And a lot of times what I notice from being in practice and from writing a dissertation for my PhD on C-section is that when people are often talking about natural birth, they're talking about unmedicated birth. So I really like to ask those clarifying questions when I'm going over like a birth vision with them of you are you wanting unmedicated? And so, like Abby mentioned, it's also often associated with physiological birth of letting the innate wisdom of the body flow and going through that dance and being with your baby as a dyad, dancing through the ebbs and flows of labor and delivery of the baby. So that's typically how I look at natural birth, but it's honestly not a term I tend to use in my research, in my writing, or in my practice, as I've found that a lot of people have shame then when they didn't have those kind of outcomes, or there was a traumatic birth or a traumatic experience that we need to dive deeper into and make meaning of. So that's my perspective on it.
Bayer, I think you're muted.
Oh, thanks, Elizabeth. Tanya.
Yeah. So what does natural birth mean to me? Well, you know, I did a home birth for both of my boys with a midwife, and I didn't need any intervention. Um, but yeah, to me, I think, w- the natural birth to me means, yeah, just that what our bodies are innately designed to do, right? Comes to birth, it's our bodies know what to do. Um, we're designed, generally speaking, to not have any kind of external interventions. I know of, I've met people who didn't even use a midwife, for example. They just did it themselves, like another, that's another level of like, natural birth, I guess you would say. It's like, we don't even need a doctor, for example. So there's this spectrum, right? And then there's people that, do the, even from pregnancy to, the birth, there's a lot of interventions. So I do feel, though, when it comes to natural birth, that there are definitely some steps that for for the best outcome for the mother and the child, like there's certain things that need to happen, obviously, like the bonding with the baby. And I do think that there's some things that are in place in in natural birthing, or just birthing itself, that don't need to happen, that have just somehow been taken as law. For example, like cutting the umbilical cord immediately after birth. I've read some things, and I'm not a doctor, so maybe Elizabeth knows more about this than I do, but that's not necessary. That there's some benefit to letting the umbilical cord stay attached to the placenta for a longer period of time, for example. There doesn't need to be a rush to cut the cord. I think there's just so many. There's a great book that I read in my first pregnancy, which is The Continuum Concept. And that's a great book to read, just to learn about what's actually happening each step of the way in the birthing process and after, and, you know, the bonding that's necessary, and so on and so forth. So um, I think, I think it's good to question everything so that you understand what's the outcome of your decisions. And sometimes, like, to Abby, what Abby was saying, sometimes you don't have a choice. You have to have the C-section for whatever reason, because the baby's at risk or you're at risk, and there's no shame or blame in any of that. But that's what natural birth means to me.
Awesome. Thank you all, ladies, for sharing. This is a super great topic too, because there's just so many women who maybe you're, pregnant for the first time, or maybe you were pregnant and maybe you had a miscarriage, or maybe you even had a stillbirth, and you're looking to see what those options are for you, even a C-section, right? There's so many different levels of birth that we all go through, and maybe some of us haven't even experienced all of the different levels either. For those who are tuning in, I have a question coming in right now. And the question is, what would you say to someone who has had a C-section and is now looking to evolve in more of a holistic approach? And anyone can speak at this time. I just ask that you don't talk over each other.
I'd love to share because this is my experience. And I wanted, I was very gung ho, and this is actually this is fresh for me. It's only about 5 months ago, and so I was with a midwife, and I wanted to go to a birth center just because we live kind of rurally, and actually our local hospital is small enough that there's no labor and delivery, and so um, yeah. Anyways, we chose a birth center, and all my appointments were at home, and it was beautiful, and I went to 42 weeks. and no labor started. And we tried to do all of the things to get things started. And I really didn't want to do anything, still kind of like, not medical intervention, but still more than I wanted to do, like a sweep or something like that. I didn't want to do that yet. I wanted to allow it. But there are laws around this, and it can make it really difficult because midwives can only be with you technically through 42 weeks. And so we eventually did some more heavier, like natural induction methods with castor oil, and it did put me into labor. And long story short, it was not good for me or baby, just because my body was not ready, and that physiological process had not started yet. And it was about 36 hours of consistent contractions, and but nothing ever happened. Nothing ever happened. I just had contractions and nothing. There's no dilation. There was nothing. And so, baby got stressed, and eventually we transferred, and they saw that we needed to do a C-section because there were significant declines in the heart rate, and they could tell he was stressed. And I knew going to the hospital is a 45-minute drive, and I kind of had this feeling this was going to happen. And so I had so much shame and guilt and so many emotions just around not being able to have that. I felt like it was unfair, like it had been kind of stripped from me, that I didn't get that chance, right? That true chance to have a natural physiological birth. And instead, it was the exact opposite. And it was on the other side of the extreme of what I didn't want. I so did not want that for all the reasons, like Tanya mentioned, even like the cord clamping, they can't really delay that. There's so many things that can't happen naturally and physiologically when that C-section happens. And we still need it sometimes. It's still life-saving. There's some things that I wish I would have done differently, like continue to wait. But thinking about, going into next birth and wanting to do that more of that physiological process, there are so many things that are still like very possible, to have like what they call either a VBAC or an HBAC, home birth after cesarean. And there's still so much that I feel like I desire in that realm, because there's a transformation that happens, right? No matter what kind of birth you have, there's a transformation that happens. But I feel like there is a beauty in that kind of unmedicated, if possible, totally unintervened birth, because there is purpose in that pain. There's transformation in that pain. And I even hesitate to say pain, but there's transformation in all of what that physiological process does to a woman to bring her out on the other side as a mother, even if you're already a mother. This is you've never been a mother to 2 or 3 or whatever it is this next time, like you are being birthed anew as well. And if you are someone who has had a C-section and you're thinking about maybe there's a different way that I can do it next time, maybe my body isn't broken, maybe I can do this, know that, well, for one, like you were built to do it in this way, right? There are ways that we get pushed into this kind of funnel that is more like the C-section route. And the more interventions you start to have, even like an epidural, and there's no shame in that whatsoever, but that is an intervention, and that can lead to other interventions because we're introducing things that are they're altering the environment of the birth process. And of course, you can have healthy babies and healthy moms and still do an epidural. The medication heavily affected me, and I personally would like to not have that next time if at all possible. But just for anyone that is kind of like thinking or in this like in between of wondering, could it be different next time? And if you're like me, and I think a lot of other women who have had unplanned C-sections, you can hold on to this feeling of guilt, this feeling of shame, this feeling of, am I broken? Can I do this? And I really, really encourage you to work through that before going into the next birth, because those feelings don't just go away on their own. We can deny them, we can not look at them, we can just put them away. But I think it's important going into the next birth to really deal with those first, to really come to terms with acceptance, not only of what is, but really feel, all the things that we want to feel or need to feel in order to kind of be this open vessel for the next birth to come. And if there's any other question in there that I missed, Fire, please direct me.
No, you answered that beautifully. And yeah, they said thank you. So that was awesome. Thank you for sharing. Elizabeth, Tanya, do you have anything that you would like to share for that particular question?
Could you repeat that question again?
Oh, yes. The question was if I am having a C-section, or I'm a mom who has had a C-section, but I want to go the natural route.
Yeah, I think absolutely. I know of many, many moms who have had the VBAC, the HBAC, they've had a C-section and they want to do a natural birth. I think it's really a matter of finding the right person to be your provider, your midwife or whatever, that they're on board with it. And if you get a no, to just, ask around, because it's definitely possible.
Awesome. Thanks. Elizabeth, I muted you. Let me unmute you if you have something. If not, it's okay. We can
No,
move
I
to
do.
the next one. Okay.
I just wanted to name, I'm also a person with visual impairment, and so I'm having a hard time finding the mute button with a non-mute button with my screen reader.
That's okay. I figure it. That's why I was like, let me just unmute for you. You're welcome.
So I love this topic. My dissertation for my somatic depth psychology PhD was on C-section. And so it's so important because 31.9% of births right now in the United States are belly births. They're cesarean. And that's not expected to drop for a decade or two, according to the research. So this is so important that 1 in 3 birthing people are going to have this experience. And absolutely, you can be more holistic. And that doesn't mean necessarily that leads to an unmedicated VBAC. It could be once you've processed your first birth story, made meaning of it, could be like, okay, what's actually best for me and my family and my experience and my health is another cesarean. But how can I make that a different experience? So when those things come up in my practice, I'll work with people and I'm like, let's bring in the right music and let's have essential oils. Let's have a point person narrating out loud to the baby what's happening because we know from the perinatal psychology research that helps mitigate trauma for the birthing person and for the baby. So there's ways of setting it up. There's also gentle birth, which is an interesting name because it's a clear curtain. There's a newer trend out of Australia called maternal assisted, where the mom actually helps pull the baby out during the cesarean. So there's these other ways of doing it as well. And I'm a chiro, I love on unmedicated birth. And also, I know that that's not right for everybody. So there's definitely ways to be more holistic. But if you had a belly birth, spend time with it, like Abby's talked about, telling your story. The research says every time you share your story, whether it's out loud, writing it, drawing it, painting it, dancing it out, you're going to make meaning and come to a greater sense of wholeness. And so that's really important. So we're not holding it in the tissues and the cells of our body. Also, having a doula is the number one way to prevent a cascade of interventions like Pitocin and epidural and going down that because that leads often to cesarean sections when they're, unless there's a complicated case where there's decels or, life-threatening emergency. So I think it's a both and. That's kind of, I live in that liminal space. So absolutely, it can be more holistic, and it can look however you need it to look, feel, and be.
Amazing. One other question just came in. What is the difference between a midwife and a doula?
Oh, yeah. Okay. Can I answer that?
Yeah.
Okay, so a doula is going to be a support person. There's some pushback and reclamation on the word because it's from Greek meaning servant woman. So some people love that, some people don't. So birth support person, a birth keeper, um, that person has some training and attends births, is there to support you and your partner to advocate for your birth plan, your birth vision. A midwife, there's different types of midwives. There's licensed midwives, and there's nurse midwives that might be more in the hospital, not necessarily though. There's also, and there's a reclamation of this too, of traditional midwives that it's more of a lineage instead of a licensure. And then there's a mixture of all of the above. So midwifery is going to be many years of schooling, apprenticeship, learning under the guidance of other midwives, whereas a doula is a certification.
Next question is, how do I know which one to choose?
Well, what do you want your birth to look like? I think is really important. So
I think there's a lot that and we need to kind of define these terms for people that don't know, because even like my family, my mother was like, well, isn't a doula, it's not the same thing as a midwife, and they're very, very different. I mean, your midwife is your medical person. Your doula is your support person. They're not medical at all. And so, if going back to that previous question, if what do I need to do, or what do we need to do to kind of have a more natural birth? And I know that's not a great term, but what do we need to do to maybe have an unmedicated or have something that doesn't, result in a C-section? And number one thing is your support people, for sure. Like, you need to find a provider. It doesn't have to be a midwife. It could be a midwife who is like, I had a licensed midwife, so she was private, and she came to my house, and she kind of had this association with the birth center. But there also are nurse practitioners who are nurse midwives, and they typically work more in like a hospital setting or a birth center that's kind of associated with the hospital. And so they're a little bit more medical. But having a provider who is really on board with, I mean, you need to interview them, on board with all of the things that you desire and your frame of mind and all of those things, especially if you're someone who has had a C-section looking to not have another C-section if possible. So there are some providers that will not do a VBAC. There are some hospitals that don't like VBACs, or they don't allow privileges for VBACs. I'm very lucky in my area that we are very, even though we're smaller and more rural in a sense, that they're very progressive in their way of thinking. And so they have all these policies that really allow for all kinds of things. I mean, from, easily, they let me take my placenta home when I wanted it. They let me, I mean, I had a whole birth plan that they were totally on board with. And I did have an OB that was not managing my pregnancy, but she was very much on board with the things that I wanted in case I needed her. And for this next one, she told me that, if you don't want to do out of hospital, I'm very much okay with doing a VBAC with you. And, we had that conversation, and it was really important to me that if I needed someone like that already in the more conventional medicine route, that they were really in line with the way that I wanted things, because it can be a huge, huge variance in what really the providers are willing to do and what their thoughts are. And even about, for me personally, if I'm a mama that goes a lot longer than 40 weeks every time, which is very possible, I want someone who's not going to push things on, day 40 and 1 or anything like that. So having someone that's on your team that is you have interviewed and know that you guys are on the same page with is so, so, so important. And that's how you're going to know who your person is and what you're comfortable with too. Because if you want a midwife out of hospital, that's going to be a very different person that you're searching for versus like a nurse midwife or even an OB, they can be very supportive too. Just know that they're trained to be more medical and to go down those interventions more so.
Thank you both. And Abby, I think you have some notifications coming in somewhere. We can hear them.
I apologize.
No, it's okay. I was like,
It's just
I
my
don't know what.
microphone. It's my microphone.
Okay. Oh, okay. I was like, I'm not sure. But anyway, I wanted to share this because I think it's very important for our listeners as well. For those of you all who are just tuning in for the first time, or maybe you've been with us for a while, just understanding that Abby talked a lot about who you want on your team. And this is the whole purpose of the Holistic Sister Circle. The goal is for you to have an opportunity to listen to who is doing what, how they experience these things, and then deciding for yourself, who do you actually want on your team? Because at the end of the day, you have a choice, right? You have a decision that you can make. And it's very important that you understand how both sides work, how both sides operate. And sometimes you may need to have both. And if that is the case, you know where to go and you know who to connect with. So I think this is super powerful. And it also goes into the next question that I actually have for all of you, which is, how how does culture, fear, and conditioning influence birth decisions? This is a big one. How
Mhm.
does culture, fear, and conditioning influence birth decisions? Tanya, I'm going to have you go first. We haven't heard you in a while.
Oh my gosh, there's so much to that. How does fear and all and culture, yeah, influence birth decisions? Yeah, it's a big one. I can just share from my personal experience. I birthed my first child when I was 28, and I was a single mom, and I was actually signed up to do a birthing center. And my closest friend, who was a very serious advocate for home births, really, like, literally got on her hands and knees and was like, "Please don't have it at a birth center." And I was like, "Why not?" Like, I was so confused because I was just young, I didn't know what my options were, and I didn't understand why she was so passionate about it, and so when I decided to go and visit the birth center, immediately I just felt like, "Oh, I am not gonna be comfortable here." It felt like a hotel room, really. And so how does that so there's so many layers, right? And then, of course, my mother, when, I didn't tell her until really the last minute that I decided to not do the birthing center and do a home birth. Like, my mother was so freaked out that she wasn't even gonna be at the birth. She's like, "I can't do it. I can't watch you go through that." A home birth seems crazy, even though the hospital was literally, like, 3 minutes down the road if something were to happen. So, really, I think ultimately when it comes to yeah, there's so many things at play when it comes to culture, right? The larger medical community in general, eh, I find that kinda looks down on birthing at home. And maybe that's changing now. It seems to be like more and more women are interested in that, and there's kind of been, at least in my little community, like, we now have a couple of midwives, and women are seeking that out. But I think for a long time, it was very discouraged. I mean, just even the thought that a woman could birth a child without interventions was thought of as crazy. So there's that, right? There's that changing culture, and maybe having to, maybe face some pushback. Because I remember when I decided to change, that I wasn't gonna go with the original OBGYN who was gonna do the birthing center, and I went with a midwife, and trying to go get my records from that person was a real pain. Like, they were rude, they gave me a lot of trouble just to get my own records. There's a little bit of a power struggle, that I encountered, and maybe I don't know if that's common or not, but it certainly was. And then the other part of the way I think ultimately it's what you feel comfortable with. I think when it comes to giving birth, if you have a lot of anxiety around the situation of how you're deciding to do it, that's gonna influence your birthing experience. So for me, I knew that a birthing center, I was not gonna feel at home or relaxed for myself. Now for another woman, she might think, "Oh my god, no way, I cannot do it at home. That seems so stressful. I want a birthing center." So I don't think fear is necessarily a bad thing in terms of gauging, okay, where are you gonna feel the most supported and the most comfortable? And to not let any judgments, whether it's somebody trying to pressure you into home birth or somebody pressuring you to have it in the hospital or everything in between, to really tune into yourself, ask your own body, how do what's going where am I gonna feel the most at peace? and the least amount of stress. So, yeah, that's what I have to say about that.
That's great. Abby, Elizabeth, I kept your mic open, FYI, in case you
Okay.
wanted to to this one.
Perfect. Well, I'm happy to go next. And um, there's definitely a shift in culture right now. I have 5 or 6 medical providers. 3 of them deliver babies for a living, and they're medical doctors. They're all doing home births or birth center births. So there is a big shift. I'm in Southern California, and one of those doctors had a home birth the other day. She's presenting at a conference to other MDs about choosing home birth. And when I asked them about it, I'm like, what's this about? They're like, yeah, we're not doing a good enough job, are we, in the hospital? So it's really curious to me that all these providers are choosing home or birth center births. The other thing with fear and culture that comes to mind is a lot of that's good. It will be intergenerational because what a lot of people don't realize is midwives can do well women visits. And so when I personally had that, my family, my stepmom's like, you should be going to a doctor. I'm like, why? I sat on my couch with my husky next to me and had a blood draw. And then the midwife handed me the vial and said, this is information. And it was so empowering. And especially for me, I've had all this medical trauma with 30 eye surgeries. And so you can relate that to maybe past birth traumas too. If you've had those, you can have these in home well women visits. And that's so makes you feel so safe. And it's just as good, if not better. They spend like 90 minutes with you. So I find that really empowering and important for people to know there's other options out there. And then, a little bit deeper into culture, even, from a C-section lens, is that that's really plays a big part in it. Where, in Brazil, there's a 55% C-section rate, and that's about vaginal preservation. In India, and they're within the upper echelons of society, people will use their Vedic astrologer priest that they use to choose the time of their wedding to choose the time of birth for their baby through C-section. In South Africa, the private hospital system has a 77% rate because the doctors make more money. So there's different reasons we have, maybe a higher C-section rate that is culturally dependent. And so as a provider, practicing that cultural humility, I think, is really important.
Awesome.
Yeah,
Thanks, Elizabeth.
it's really, really interesting, Elizabeth. That's really cool that you know those stats in other countries because I think about, yeah, this is such a great question. I think about our culture, and I can just speak to our own culture and what I live in every day. And I'm a nurse as well. I didn't put my credentials, but I'm a nurse and I am also very much in the holistic field. I'm a holistic children's eczema expert, and that is what I breathe in and day out. And so C-sections and natural births and all that is a topic we talk about a lot because it has a lot to do with babies and eczema and these kinds of things too. But really, there is, coming from the Western medical world, excuse me, it's really it's a fear-based system in a lot of ways. And, like when you're a nurse, when you're a doctor, when you're part of this system, the way that you're trained is to intervene when things go wrong, right? So you're not trained necessarily, and I can speak to what I know about OBs is that OBs are not trained to allow the natural physiological process so much. They're really trained to intervene, to be able to keep babies alive. And also there are other things um, that happen that are really on a timeline, their own timeline, the hospital's timeline. The hospitals, there's just a culture in hospitals that they really want to mitigate any sort of risk whatsoever. And so is it less risky for them to just call a C-section after a certain amount of hours, even though it's not nearly enough, especially for a first-time mom? 6 or 10 hours is not enough time to allow a mom or to cut a mom off and say, okay, you're done. Like you're not progressing enough. So we have to do a C-section. Well, what is the real reason for that? Is there a doctor's timeline? Is there a hospital risk here that they're trying to mitigate? After so many hours, they think that the risk is higher for them. So we just need to get these babies out, and it's safest in their eyes from their business model to be able to just do a C-section. So I think that going back to just like the training of of us, like I'm in that as far as being a nurse, you are trained to see the worst. You are trained to intervene at the worst, and you are trained to almost kind of be in this fear-based state, and not allow that natural physiological process as much. And so that really influences our culture, because when you see, I don't know, Elizabeth, maybe like the actual, at least in the US, what
Mhm.
the stats are as far as home birth or outside of hospital birth versus in hospital birth, but it's very, very low. The percentage of out of hospital birth is very, very low. And why is that? A lot of it is because we are trained to fear that it is not safe to do so. It is not safe to be out of the hospital. But is that the actual truth? Is that the fact? And I know that one of my very best friends, she's married to a doctor. And when I told her that I was going to do a birth center or just an out of hospital birth, he basically told her, why would you do that when you could be in the hospital and have at your, arm's length anything that you need in that moment? Why would you do that? And so he's thinking, well, there's a lot of things that could go wrong. So why would you be in a setting that doesn't have that available to you right that moment? And there's a little bit of gray in this area because midwives have a lot of things that they can still do. They can do IVs, they can do medication, they're not going to do Pitocin, but there are some things that they can do. I'm sorry, they can do Pitocin
Mhm.
as like an injection after birth, but they're not going to use it to further along the birth. There are interventions that they can use that are more gentle, but that they can still manage, in a birth center or at home. It's just not going to be surgery or, anesthesia or something. And so I think our culture has really grasped onto the fear because of movies, because of all these things that we see of what could possibly go wrong. And we immediately think that, this is what's very real for me, like this might happen to me. And yes, it could, but do we really know the stats and the chances of those things that could happen that would require you to be in the hospital? I bet you it's a very, very, very low percentage of what actually could happen. And so when we allow this ability to actually see the stats and the facts and not allow fear to just cloud everything that we're making our judgments and our decisions by, we can maybe have the clarity and relax into the possibility of what can happen when you don't have a hospital birth, because there are a lot of positives, and maybe that's something that we'll go into. There are a lot of positives when we don't go into the hospital system. Even if we do, it's okay. It's okay if we do, but I think there needs to be more education. I know there's the movie called, oh gosh, I'm sure some of you guys know it. It's Birthing at Home, or I don't know. There's a movie out there. It's more of a documentary, I think, that's kind of trying to get this out there that it's okay and it's safe to be at home.
Mhm. I think also we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about the culture around obstetric racism and violence, and that in the United States, Black women die at 3 to 4 times the rate as white women in hospital birth settings. And that's just something we have to bring up. That's, I think, is so rooted in institutionalized racism within the, from the history of obstetrics and gynecology. And really scary. So, especially, I'm in Ventura, California, outside LA, but especially in LA, all the way up in Santa Barbara, starting during the pandemic, a lot of Black women and BIPOC birthing people should start choosing home birth and other options because it simply wasn't safe for them, as a person of color, to birth in a hospital setting. And there's some research around in New York City, it's 12 times the rate. So that's a huge issue and, brings up that cycle of fear and what's embedded in our culture. And it's, especially within obstetrics and the history.
Mm. This is so true, and you have such a great point to this. I wish we had more time to go into that a little bit more.
Mhm.
Um, but and I can also give a personal story with this as well, because obviously a lot of you already know that I don't personally have children of my own, but I've been pregnant, and I had a miscarriage. And one of the questions that I used to get a lot was, when did intuition play into navigating what the possibilities were going to be for you for your miscarriage? And for those who, are listening to this and thinking, okay, like, maybe this is me, or maybe I'm in a situation right now where I just don't feel safe and I feel very uncomfortable. I will say that when it comes to having these conversations just about health in general, yes, as a woman of color, yes, we do tend to get overlooked. Yes, we do tend to not have the tools and the resources that we need, and we don't even know where to go to even get them. And what I've noticed is even within this community that we have right now, I actually have to go, I go outside of my race to find the information because everyone that I am connected to or know, one, they're either not practicing what we're talking about, or two, they don't even know what to do in the first place. So I've encountered these experiences, but I've also been on the other side of it where when does your intuition play into this? And when do you not play that victim card, but also understand that, yes, these things are happening and yes, these things are real, but it also doesn't have to be your story because the information is there and the information is available to whoever needs it. But having that opportunity to say, okay, I have this in place and now I have people that are supportive, that it doesn't matter how I look or it doesn't matter, what I'm going through, that they're actually going to be in a position where they can even share information with me. It's just so valuable. And this is one of the reasons why, I created this in the first place because, I am a walking experiment of that, of not getting the answers, being overlooked, even for my miscarriage as well. I was pushed into the direction of you need to take these pills, or you need to have, oh my gosh, I can't think of the terminology right now, but they had to like go in and actually remove, yes, the DNC. Thank you. You need to have a DNC. And, for me, I'm like, I'm already traumatized. The last thing I want is to take these pills or to have you just scrape all this stuff out of me. Like, what does it actually look like for me to do this naturally? Because that's what I feel like I need to do. I feel like my body is just under too much stress right now, and I need to be calm about the situation. But at the same time, I have family members telling me, why would you do that? I have friends, why would you do that? You need to go through this. And I think it's a lot on someone. You're a woman, but also, of course, a woman of color as well, not knowing that you can trust your own intuition and you can make these decisions based on what your body is telling you as well. So I love this topic, and I would love for us to get more in depth on it. But for the sake of time, I do have one last question that I would love to ask each of you before we go into what you all do and how we can connect with you further. And that question is, how can women be better supported? Right. And Elizabeth, I know you did mention and talk about the racism of this as well. If you want to go into that, I'm happy for you to do so. Whether it's birthing naturally or in a hospital or through a hybrid approach, how can women be best supported? I would love for us to end there.
Well, creating your circle where you do feel safe and maybe trying other modalities, preconception, or if you're pregnant, your baby's your teacher. And so I get a lot of new patients into my practice who've never been to a chiropractor before. They're afraid of it. And I like to make that a really gentle, good experience. But trying things like acupuncture, Ayurveda, interviewing doulas, creating this support system and team so that you feel safe and held in your experience, and talking through, being I like to have people in therapy too, especially first pregnancy or first baby. I'm like, I need you in therapy and I need you to have a doula no matter what kind of birth experience you're looking to have. So really having that network, I think, is so vitally important. And you're right, like it can be hybrid, especially for therapists. Look for somebody who practices somatics. That's the lived experience of the body, because we hold so much inside of ourselves intergenerationally and from our own experience throughout the lifetime. So that's where I'd love to end.
Awesome. Thank you. Abby.
Yeah, I would love to just kind of ditto some of that because I think having a support person who is not necessarily your partner, they've never done this before potentially, or even if they have, like it's not something they do all the time. And so having a support person like a doula, I think is unmatched. I was lucky enough that my midwife just provided a doula and I met her many, many times. If I had chosen my own doula, we probably would have gone a little bit deeper and she would have come to my house beforehand, before I went to the birth center, and that wasn't the case. But I felt that because I had a midwife who, when she was at my house, it was an hour every single time. You don't get that kind of time with a provider if you are more in the medicalized system, if you're like with an OB or someone, or even um, a nurse practitioner who's a midwife. So really being able to kind of sit with, you talked about intuition. Well, what blocks intuition more so than fear? And so if we can start to really think about or just feel into, what do we actually desire for our birth? What do we actually want? And what is programmed into us because of fear? And that can be really hard to discern. And maybe that's where therapy comes in and you can kind of work through this, because a lot of the things that we think are our beliefs are just fear based that have been given to us. They're not even ours. And so being able to discern that what fear feels like in our body versus what our own intuition, our own voice feels like, I feel like is really important. And then you have to have those support people. I mean, find a way to hire a doula and have someone outside of your medical provider, outside of your partner, outside of your family and friends, that is their sole job, is to support you as a mama, not even baby, literally support you. And I think that is really, really important, because otherwise it can go so differently. Like Elizabeth said, there can be a totally different percentage with doula and without doulas. So I think that's really important to do that. And then really, become educated on a lot of things, because say you go the OB route, there's a lot of things you're not going to learn, in that 5-10 minutes where they just do a measurement and a quick little, maybe they'll do an ultrasound, here and there, but there's a lot of things that you're not going to learn from them. So really learn the process, learn what your body's going through, connect with that, and then, also have that support person that you probably hire as well.
Awesome. Thanks, Abby. Tanya?
Yeah, I agree with everything that has been said, and I wanted to just bring up, for the mothers that are going through the birthing process as a single woman, because that was my first experience. I was a single mom. The father was just not really in the picture, and yeah. So what I can say about that, I think it's super important. The therapy aspect. I remember going through my first birth, and in the process of, for me, there was a lot of rejection from the family because I was, unwed and having a child out of wedlock. Like there was that, thing. And I know that's the case for a lot of women nowadays. When I had my first home daycare, most of the children I took care of were of single women, and so um, to be able to let go of any stories that don't actually belong to us. So for me, the shame that was put on me that really had nothing to do with me. It was like their issue. Being able to let that go really helped with the birthing process, because that was something that was happening. And being support, I didn't have a doula, but I had two really close friends that I really loved and trusted and felt spiritually connected to, and both very intuitive. It was really helpful. So, like, if you are a single mom, let's say you can't afford a doula, for example, finding someone, an elder or somebody that's been through the birthing process or has been through a home birth process that's willing to support you makes a huge difference. I know for myself, had I not had those close friends to be with me because I didn't have a partner, um, I can't imagine what it would have been like had I had to do it all by myself. Um, so that's really, really important, really powerful. Connecting with other women. And also, there's also just really great resources with my second there was a nonprofit nearby that hosted um, basically a circle of birthing women that were going through pregnancy. We would meet, you know, I forget how often it was. Maybe it was once a month or every other week or something. But to be in a group with other women going through pregnancy and just sharing what's happening, what they're going through, talking with women who have recently gone through a home birth or their birthing experience, and just normalizing everything can really, like, okay, you know, whatever symptoms you're dealing with, whether it's hemorrhoids or acid reflux or, all those things that come with pregnancy, so that you're just like, okay, this is okay, this is normal. And then just to share resources like, natural remedies to support you in the pregnancy and afterwards. I know for myself, um, homeopathy was really powerful. So yeah, so that's all I wanted to add to what Abby and Elizabeth both said.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you for tying it back to also the single mamas out there too. I do think that's important that they do have that information. And I would love to get more into depth of what homeopathy is, but that's another story for another day. So we have two great topics that just need a little bit more explanation. But for the sake of time, we have about 5 minutes. So I would love for all of you to just share who you are, what you do, and how we can connect with you. Please keep it under 2 minutes just so we can get through everyone and we can wrap up right on time. Abby, we can start with you.
Yeah, so Abby Bradford, and I am like I said, holistic children's eczema expert. We work with children, babies, lots of babies, all the way up until 18 years of age. And we really get to the root cause of what's going on. And so I have a lot of training in gut health and detoxification and skin health and lots of things there. I'm a clinical herbalist as well. And so that's kind of like the farthest you can go in herbalism, really working with the pieces of the land and how we can use that with the body. And I have a passion for kids. Even before I had my own, I really transitioned to just working with kids, and I have a passion for that. I feel like because these children are coming in now with an epidemic of issues, and I really feel like they are our future, and my passion is really to support them and support mamas who are nursing them and feeding them as well, because they're part of that diet too. So that's where I'm at, and on Instagram, Abby Bradford is where you can find me the best.
Awesome. Thank you. Elizabeth?
Sure, I'm Dr. Elizabeth Wisniewski. I'm a Webster plus perinatal certified chiropractor, have a PhD in somatic depth psychology, and a lot of other certifications. Best way to find me is Instagram at Dr. Elizabeth Wisniewski. Also, I have a tech company called Dream Planet. If you're a creator, join us there. It's on Google Play and the Apple App Store, and that's a great way to connect with me as well.
Awesome. Tanya?
Yeah, so I do energy work and family constellations, and um, I find family constellations really powerful when it comes to dealing with any kind of whether you had a miscarriage or stillborn or anything that's standing in the way between you and motherhood. Resolving those issues, family constellations is really great. And then energy work is also really powerful in supporting the birthing process as well. I know I received it when I was going through my births with my kids. And you can find me at newearthconsciousness.com. I'm also on Facebook as Tanya Elena. You can find me there. And thank you so much.
Absolutely. Well, thank you all. This was such a great conversation and such a good panel. I love this. So, anyway, for me, again, you all already know this, but without further ado, for those who are new tuning in, this is the Holistic Sister Circle podcast. We stream every Tuesday at 2 p.m. Eastern, a different topic between now and the remainder of the year. So, please tune in or tell a friend to tune in as well. We also host Podcast Playground for female entrepreneurs. So if you or someone that you know is an entrepreneur and loves to speak about what they do further and would love to connect with us there, you totally can do that too. Well, thank you, ladies, so much for your time. And until next time, we'll talk soon.